What's up, co-reporters, and welcome back to my channel. We have so much to talk about when it comes to the Carlee Russell case. How she went missing, how she came back, what's going to happen with her life moving forward now that she has officially been charged with falsely reporting an incident, moving forward. Remember, Carlee Russell is a 25-year-old nursing student, and this could impact her for life, essentially, right? Even if she doesn't serve any jail time, there still are repercussions that she might face because now when you Google her name, Carlee Russell, all of this information is going to pop up. And so I am joined by Dmitry Shaknovich of the YouTube channel D Shak Law to kind of break down everything that's going down here for all of us. Because listen, we're aware of the story, but the average person here, myself included, is not a lawyer. So there are some details that we just don't really understand. So we are super lucky to be joined by Dmitry. Dmitry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So can you give us a little bit of a background on your life in law, your legal career, becoming a professor and now becoming a YouTuber as well?
Sure. I don't know if I classify myself as a YouTuber. But I am a lawyer. I've been practicing law for nearly 10 years now. I practice in criminal defense and some other family related issues and civil litigation as well. And I teach at a college here in New York called John Jay College of Criminal Justice, not this past semester, but in general. I've been teaching at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And several years ago, because of COVID, the whole world went remote, and I've never done remote teaching. And so I had to learn how to do Zoom and all these other things. And invariably, when you do that, it's tough to maintain engagement because sometimes your students are at home and they have family obligations, all reasonable things. And it's tough to maintain that interest. And so I started this YouTube channel to try to elevate that and try to further kind of escalate their abilities to stay dialed in to criminal justice and the law and other things that I talk about. And so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, then my YouTube channel is at D Shak Law. Please check it out.
That is absolutely incredible. It's funny how you're going so far above and beyond for your students, because obviously for me, being a full-time YouTuber, I know how much work goes into putting in videos, the thumbnails, the descriptions, the titles, everything, and promoting it. So the fact that you're doing this just to help your students is so incredible. I hope they are appreciative of all that you do, because it's a lot. I love that for your students. They're so lucky to have you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I don't nearly devote as much time to YouTube as other people do. Obviously, all of my time virtually goes into representing my clients who deserve all my attention and are entitled to all my attention. So that is what I do. But I like doing this. It's interesting and compelling sometimes. And so I'll continue to do it to the extent that time allows.
Good. I love it. So let's get into the Carlee Russell story. This has to be one of the wildest stories that I've seen in a while. Okay. And so I just want to know kind of your sort of overview of the situation from the beginning, how she filed the report to how we are here right now. So how did her story sort of begin to fall apart in the eyes of the law? Like, where did she go wrong in reporting herself as a missing person?
Well, look, I've said from the very beginning, and I'm not an idiot, so I know how people perceive this stuff on the web and on social media and so on and so forth. It was incredibly important to let the police do their job and conduct their investigation. Because if and when somebody would have been arrested or charged or indicted or tried for any crimes here, it's important that the police gather evidence the right way, search for evidence the right way, maintain leads that are appropriate, and conduct themselves in accordance with the law, right? Because if and when certain pieces of evidence go to court in this case, it's important to make sure that that evidence is sufficient and may be admissible. So it was very hard to maintain patience for a lot of people. Now we're at a stage where it seems a bit is more clear, not nearly everything, but a bit is more clear. And we will see how the criminal justice process plays out as it relates to these two misdemeanor charges that it seems that she's now charged with, and the court process that follows those charges.
And so in speaking of how people are not as patient as they should be these days, with the rise of true crime podcasters, YouTubers, tweeters, etc. How do you feel like that has impacted investigations these days? Like, for example, with the Carlee Russell investigation, I'm sure that there were some amateur kind of like online reporters and whatnot trying to solve the case.
Well, it's important, number one, to talk about the actual facts and not speculation and rumor and so on and so forth. The problem was, in this case, nobody knows what the facts are. I still think that very few people know what the facts are. And what's important is for police, and folks were expressing frustration about how the police weren't coming forward, providing the public with information. The police had a job to do, and it seems like, at least for now, they did that job in ascertaining what actually happened, to the extent that they know. And again, I'm sure there's some things that they don't know, and there are even more things that the rest of us don't know. So that idea that we should all be patient is still in play.
And now, when it comes to her being charged, she was charged with falsely reporting an incident, for example. So those charges, I believe, I remember reading that they carry up to 1 year in jail or prison. What is the likelihood? And maybe can you clarify what those charges are and what the penalties can be? What is the likelihood that she will serve time versus having community service or paying a fine or something like that?
Sure. So a few things. These two charges are misdemeanors, right? Misdemeanors generally allow for up to a year in prison, in jail. Now, look, in terms of the policy considerations here, generally speaking, right, prosecutors' offices do not like to prosecute people that report crime, right, even if that report turns out to be false, right, because the idea is you don't want to disincentivize victims from coming forward, because it can be a slippery slope. Certainly, most people that come forward with crimes that end up being untrue don't just make them up out of nowhere, right? There may be a mistake made and something of that nature. So you got to be real careful before you prosecute people who report crimes, right? Our system is dependent on people coming forward and reporting crimes. Now, in terms of how the case will play out, in terms of the penalties she'll get, whether it'll be incarceration versus something else, that will largely depend on her, on the reasons why she committed these crimes, assuming she did commit them. Again, she's charged with these crimes. She's innocent until proven guilty. Again, I know a concept that is hard to abide by, given what a lot of people think they know. But it's important to say that she's alleged to have committed these crimes. She hasn't been convicted of anything yet. And if and when there are plea discussions engaged in, and so on and so forth, it will depend on the reason behind why she committed these crimes. And depending on that, punishment, which is sentencing, which is what you're asking about, will be a mitigation decision, right? A decision that encompasses her background, her life, her criminal history, so on and so forth. Generally speaking, depending on where you are in the country, people that are charged with misdemeanors for the first time do not serve any prison time. But again, every case is different and fact specific.
Guys, if you're just joining me, I am joined with Dmitry Sheknovich from DShack Law. He's got a YouTube channel where he provides legal commentary videos. If you are interested, make sure to hit the link in the description box down below to check out his channel. So, Dmitry, you mentioned something that I thought was really interesting, which is that typically police don't want to actually prosecute or charge people with false crime reporting, because at the end of the day, the system depends on people reporting crimes. So why is that? Is there any kind of study that has been done on why people might falsely report a crime? Is there kind of like a correlation between maybe mental illness or anything like that, or kind of, anything else, abuse or what have you?
Well, so generally speaking, let's step back and talk about crime in general. I happen to deal with people charged with crimes every day of my life, way more often than the average person. And so I can tell you that generally speaking, people that are accused of crimes or even convicted of crimes are not evil people, generally speaking. Once in a while, you'll get somebody that just gets a kick out of causing harm to others. That's very rare, very rare. Generally, when somebody commits a crime, it comes from somewhere, right? And that's a philosophical discussion that is beyond the scope of this case, obviously. But
Mhm.
prosecutors must look at all those things. And those considerations really comprise an endless list, right? From background to upbringing to mental health to substance abuse. I mean, these reasons are endless. And so it's important that when we punish people in this country, as we purport to do, we do that for rehabilitative purposes, right? We punish somebody so that we can address the underlying reason they committed the crime. Otherwise, if we don't do that, they'll just commit the crime again at some point, right? So the idea is to fix that underlying problem. And
Mhm.
it will depend on what that underlying problem in the case was, right? And depending on that, her punishment should be narrowly tailored to fit that underlying reason.
Mhm. So, from what I've seen so far, it seems like she is very forthcoming about what it is that she's done. She's very apologetic. I believe I remember reading a statement from her and her team as well. Let me see. So, her lawyer said, and I quote, "We ask for your prayers for Carlee as she addresses her issues and attempts to move forward, understanding that she made a mistake in this matter. Carlee again asks for your forgiveness and prayers." So, they're saying that she has some sort of issue going on with her. I don't know if it's an emotional issue. I don't know if it's a mental issue or what have you, but it seems like she is genuinely remorseful about what it is that she did. So, but I kind of get a feeling that they almost want to make an example out of her because of like the size of the story. It was a really big story. Remember, I'm not American. I'm not even living in North America anymore. I'm Canadian, but I live in France, and this is a story that we've heard about even over here. So is this a case of like them wanting to make an example of her because this was such a huge spectacle?
It's possible, and that's a shame, right? That is not the way it should be. That is not what prosecutors and police should be doing, and I have no reason to think that they are. I mean, it seems to me from everything I've observed that everybody here has been as fair and as diligent as possible. But generally speaking, it doesn't help criminal defendants to be involved in high profile cases, right? Because high profile cases are in the public, all cases are public record generally, but high profile cases are cases that the public, or at least certain sectors of the public, are paying attention to. And so that's generally not helpful. But that doesn't mean that the prosecutors and the police won't do a good job and won't be fair. But again, if that's the case, that's a shame. And I don't see any evidence that that is the case.
Mhm. So let's say she is prosecuted for these things that she's been charged with. How would this affect her career moving forward? Carlee Russell, she's 25 years old and she's in nursing school, presumably to become a nurse and work in healthcare one day. Can this sort of derail her plans?
That's a great question. Very few people ask me that question, but that's actually a terrific question. A lot of people think that if you're charged with a misdemeanor, which is generally deemed a low level crime, that you really have no consequence because you generally don't go to jail. You generally don't have to pay money that is of any large sum in restitution. Community service is generally not anything too prohibitive. But you're absolutely right. A misdemeanor is a crime. And if somebody is convicted of a crime, they have a criminal record. And in some places, you can't get rid of that criminal record that easily. And so in this particular case, what matters, and really in all cases, what matters isn't so much how the case starts with the arrest, it will matter how it ends, right? If the case is resolved by way of a plea or at trial in some way with a criminal disposition that will give her a criminal record, for sure that will impact her life, right? And that will
Mhm.
impact anybody's life. Any doctor, lawyer, nurse, teacher, anybody who works or is licensed by the government, by the state, typically has to report criminal offenses. I presume this will be no different. That doesn't mean she'll be prohibited from working. That doesn't mean she'll be, have her license taken away. None of that. While that's possible, that's not predetermined. But there is a process where you have to report these things, and sometimes there are hearings held, and so on and so forth. So, getting a criminal conviction is a really, really big deal.
Mhm. Oh, that's quite scary for her. Speaking of plea deals, what sort of plea deal might she be offered in this situation?
Oh well, that there is a whole range of options, right? There are a whole range of options that are really directed towards what the courts call diversion, right? as I said earlier, because the courts are generally interested in rehabilitating defendants, most courts around the country at this point have diversion programs where they divert people from the court system to other social programs or alternatives to incarceration, as they call them.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be mental health treatment, that could be some other sort of treatment, that could be counseling, that could be community service, there could be monetary penalties involved, a plethora of options that the courts have at their disposal to make sure that the result here is fair.
Okay. So as someone who knows literally nothing, so for example, if she were to offer, maybe paying a fine or doing some kind of community service, would that be in exchange for this not being like, this wouldn't be on her record, right? At all?
Well, generally, when somebody enters a plea agreement, a plea deal, the idea is for the charges to be reduced. Otherwise, there's no reason to do it, right? So generally what would happen is the prosecution would come forward and offer a plea deal and say, look, here's what we think she did, and here's what we're going to charge her with, and here's our evidence, and here's what, or at least that's the way it should be, and here's what we propose we agree to, so that everybody can leave relatively unharmed and she can pay her debt to society. That's how plea agreements typically work in cases such as this. Obviously, if you have serious cases, violent cases, murder cases, and the like, plea deals in those cases are rare. But in a case like this, that is certainly a possibility.
Okay. And what is lower than a misdemeanor, or is misdemeanor the lowest?
Misdemeanor, generally speaking, again, is the lowest crime, right, in many places. Other violations of the law, let's say, exist. Here in New York, for example, you have a disorderly conduct. It's basically a violation of the law. It's not a crime, but it's something that will, again, give you that violation for a certain period of time before it's sealed. So many cases have that. In New Jersey, there's something called a disorderly persons offense. They have municipal ordinances. So every state has its way. Generally speaking, a misdemeanor isn't the lowest violation of the law.
Mm-hmm. So now I got to ask you, as a lawyer, did you think that it was smart for her legal team to come out with statements admitting fault and whatnot? Is that something that you would have done if you were representing Carlee?
It's tough to say because they have all the evidence and I don't, and they have all the information and I don't. I would like to think that what the lawyers did was done for a reason, right? What you're implying isn't wrong, right? No lawyer wants to admit fault or guilt or responsibility on behalf of their client. But I would assume that their lawyers know that and that they're experienced, good lawyers. And they probably did that because they thought that would benefit her in some way. And they probably did that in lengthy consultation with her about the pros and the cons of what can happen. And they probably did that after talking to the police and prosecutors, right? And so I assume that what we see on the surface isn't what's going on. I assume that the lawyers made informed decisions, as they should and as most lawyers do.
Mm-hmm. And so speaking of what's going on, what can we expect now moving forward now that Carlee has been charged? I'm not aware of whether or not she actually spent any time in jail or whether she was just there to get the mugshot, be fingerprinted, and kind of be released on bail or anything like that. What's happening? What happens at this point typically? Or in this case, if you're aware of any details that I haven't seen yet?
Well, what happens is largely dependent on what's already happened. Sometimes in these cases, lawyers will get together with prosecutors, and even before the surrender happens, which is the precursor to the arraignment, prosecutors and defense lawyers work out what will happen. And so it's tough to say right now. Generally, the way a case would work is you would come to court, and on a misdemeanor, there would be discovery turned over and document exchange and hearings and trial prep and so on and so forth, a process that could last many, many, many months, if not more. But in this particular case, because it's so high profile, I'm assuming there was some arrangement entered into between the lawyers, the prosecution, and the defense to work towards a resolution. That would be my inkling here. Because you can't try this case because she effectively admitted guilt through her lawyers. So there's not much to do other than to reach a peaceful resolution. That's my estimation of what's going on based on what I've seen.
Mm-hmm. And what would be a peaceful resolution, in your opinion, as a lawyer?
So again, I'm assuming there will be some a violation of the law plea, either to a misdemeanor or something else, and possibly some programming, some alternatives to incarceration, some diversion programs. I don't know about financial penalties and something like this, but it would be something that should be, again, narrowly tailored to address the reason why all this happened.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure if you're aware of the Jussie Smollett case that happened. I think it was last year or the year before that, but he essentially had his own hoax. He claimed that he was hate crimed. I don't know if it was because he was Black or if it was because he was gay or a combination of the two, but he essentially said that people threw like a noose on him, etc., or beat him and stuff. And then he was eventually kind of charged to jail time, I believe it was. So why do you think that in that case he was charged to jail time instead of kind of, getting evaluated to see what would drive him to do something like that?
So exactly right. I'm assuming the reason that happened was for a variety. Well, number one, perhaps there was a stronger case on the facts for the defense, right? If the defense goes to trial on a case, they have to have a good faith defense, right? They're not just going to go and fall on their sword on all points. So there must have been, I know about the case. I don't know every detail about the case, but there must have been some theories of plausible defense that they put forward, right, to a jury. So that's number one. Number two, and you're absolutely right, you hit that nail right on the head. What was the reason why he allegedly did this, or now if he was convicted, why he did this, right? That's the key. That's the key. Maybe prosecutors were less willing to work with him in this case. Maybe in Carlee Russell's case, they'll be more willing. That is all dependent on what's going on underneath the surface. You understand?
Yeah. Okay. I think maybe Jussie also didn't admit the way that Carlee admitted. I think he was still trying to like hold on to this like kind of hoax until the bitter end, as far as I'm aware.
And again, that's a decision that clients make with their lawyers every day, right? I'm going to be charged with a crime. What do? You get in touch with the prosecutors, you look at the evidence, and you make a determination with your client as to next steps. I'm assuming they did that in both cases here, just with different results.
Exactly. So now let's say again, hypothetically, she were to be convicted. How does getting your record expunged work? Is there a certain amount of time that you have to wait before you do that? What's the likelihood of this being expunged from your record?
It really depends on the state. Every state is different. And it'll depend. Some states have a period of time. In New York, there was a law that was just put into effect several years ago that allows for expungement after X amount of time, depending on the crime that you're charged with. Typically, expungement is crime dependent and time dependent, right? It depends on the severity of the offense and how long it's been since the time of the conviction.
Okay. Let me see. I think, oh my goodness gracious. Oh, I did have one last final question for you. By the way, you guys, if you're just joining me, I am here with Dmitry Shaknovich from D-Shack Law on YouTube, legal expert, lawyer, and law professor as well. Make sure to subscribe to his channel, D-Shack Law on YouTube, for more legal commentary. But I do have one final question. A lot of people have been talking about how Carlee Russell's hoax might impact missing Black women and girls moving forward. Apparently, missing Black women and girls already aren't taken as seriously as other races of women in terms of the amount of Amber Alerts they get or media coverage, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that this can impact that negatively moving forward?
Look, from a philosophical perspective, whenever somebody fakes a crime, right? And again, she's innocent here until proven guilty. But if and when somebody is found to have faked a crime, that always negatively impacts crime victims. Always. There is no way around that. At the end of the day, though, we rely on law enforcement and prosecutors to treat every case equally, right? And we really have no choice but to do that in this country, because in this country, police and prosecutors have something called discretion. Prosecutorial discretion if you're a prosecutor, and a police discretion if you're in law enforcement. They make determinations that are really judgment calls based on factors that are non-determinative, meaning there's a whole lot of gray there on how they prosecute and how they investigate crimes. They should treat every crime with the utmost importance. The police in this case, right, said that irrespective of what happened here, we will treat every crime with the utmost importance. So legally, it shouldn't have an impact. We would hope it shouldn't have an impact, because otherwise you can blow your brains out, right? The idea is that we have to rely on these people to help us maintain order in our society, right? But philosophically, there is certainly no denying that when somebody makes up a crime, it doesn't help crime victims. There's no doubt about that. And again, in this case, it's important to wait and see what actually happens in this case, whether she'll be convicted, and if and when she is convicted, if she's convicted, what the reasoning behind all these things were. Those are all important. But from a largely kind of broad philosophical perspective, you're absolutely right. Crime victims are often negatively impacted by this kind of stuff.
Oh, it's so unfortunate. And, sorry, I did forget something. Her searches on her computer, what was that about? Was she searching on regular internet? Was she at least incognito when she made those searches? Like, what was that?
First of all, anybody here who thinks that they're going to search incognito and the government won't be able to find what you're doing is silly. Anything in 2023, you better operate under the idea that whatever you do, anybody can find out. It's a lot easier that way if you set your expectations appropriately. Incognito is not going to provide a real layer of protection against what the government can see. And these days, that kind of stuff may be evidence, right, of intent and of other things. And so, it's something people should be aware of. And not just in the criminal realm in general. It's, we are in 2023. Keep that in mind.
Goodness. Oh my God. Guys, this has been so incredible. Dimitri, thank you so much for joining me here. Your wealth of knowledge is just, wow, ever flowing. And we're so lucky that you were able to share with us. Again, Dimitri has a channel here on YouTube called D-Shack Law, where he shares more legal videos and commentary. And you're quite regular with your uploads as well, Dimitri, I have to say.
I try.
Again, thank you so much for joining. I have a link to his YouTube channel in the description box down below. Make sure to check out his channel and subscribe for more videos as well. We'll keep you posted on the Carlee Russell story. Okay, you guys, make sure to leave all of your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. And as usual, we'll chat. Thanks again, Dimitri, for being here.
Thank you for having me. A lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Of course. Bye, guys.